This afternoon. It's called Winston Hide's 2015 A Career Odyssey. And I thought up the theme of this because it's pretty much been an odyssey, but it's a short one. But really what I want to talk about and get across is how choice is a handmaiden to the king of not being able to control a thing in your life. So it's very tough, and I mean I'm a rare bird, and that's because I never really was brought up in one country, and we were careful to avoid some very hectic politics that really affected my family. So it forced the family to move around, and I think the result of that was that I was fortunate enough to pick up lots of different cultures, none of which have stuck with me, which is why I'm always so out of sorts with everyone. I'm sorry about that. So the first thing I remember back in terms of career choice is a very early one. Gerald Durrell, who's an author, whose brother is a friend of Rich Durbin, and you know, it's a very small world. And I realized I wanted to do research very young. A friend of mine who's a girl would squash snails, and then we'd write about the color of the different kinds of snails' blood. And we didn't know it was copper-based, and all that kind of cool stuff. We'd had little notebooks, and I really was a little geek. I didn't know it. And I knew very much that I wanted to do biology and zoology. That was my strong interest. I really loved being out in nature. It was in graduate school that it was an undergraduate that I discovered BASIC and programming and computers, and I really loved the way that you had to formalize things. And so those were the key components which drove the rest of my career. And I wanted to understand how things worked, and I liked to organize stuff. So I actually thought originally I was going to become a taxonomist. And so I took a degree path that was around those ideas. And so I'm going to go with you today around the academics, sort of why I chose the research I've done, the falls that affected choice, how I scratched the silicon itch, and the underlying issue of trying to do something good because I've basically been so bad. And I feel very bad for things I've done not correctly, and there's a lot of sort of guilt in what drives me. So the first thing I want to say is your gut is damn good at telling you what to do, which is why Curtis studies microbiome. And as you know, we're beginning to learn, things come up, travel up your vagus nerve into your brain from your gut, including viruses, and there's an enormous amount of interplay between gut feeling and brain. I'm not kidding. I think there's actually something in this story. I should go off in that direction. But the take home is that it's been very helpful to me because I do all my decisions fast asleep. I ask a lot of people for things, get their input, then I sleep on it many nights. And sometimes I come to a conclusion. If it's a very difficult question, I spend a lot of time trying to figure out the answer. But I don't go through a formal process of a thought diagram or any diagrammatic essence, although there's pros and cons essays. So gut is a big issue with me, and I think that's because I allow my subconscious to do a lot of the hard work. So I had a very tough high school, great high school, very tough experience going through that, and I actually met my wife-to-be, and it was very hard emotionally on me because of ups and downs in that process, and I basically was very affected emotionally. And I was very sensitive to how people thought about me, and that affected how I thought about my teachers, and that affected how I worked in particular subjects. And so I got appalling A levels. I got the lowest you could possibly get and still get out of school. I got D's and E's. And I scraped into a university by virtue of the headmaster getting me in. Yeah, I was even below the system that gets you in if you did really badly. That's how bad it was. So my transcript for my A levels looks appalling. But when I got into the degree program at Cardiff in Wales, I did exactly what I'd always wanted to do, which was zoology. I flew, and no problem, grades were superb. So I learned something about that, and that was work in an environment which can teach you that does something you really care about. And I wanted to work in a museum. And my honours degree was on a thesis of the people who are behind putting the exhibits out and what's involved in that. And it was a really fun example of how to take zoology and turn it into a human passion. Until I discovered what museum curators are paid in the UK. And so I had to leave the country. No, not because of that. Actually, I was not allowed to stage. It was during apartheid, and white South Africans were not encouraged to stage, to put it mildly. And so I went to the States, and after some thought about what to do with my degree, I went to Temple, and that was because I knew that Ted Bundy had gone to Temple. No, kidding. But now we were really pleased Bill Cosby went there, but now. So, anyway, I went there too, right? So I'm up for the next one. So anyway, I actually ended up at Temple because I applied to Penn and they wouldn't take me. And they wouldn't take me because I'd come in from zoology and I wanted to do molecular genetics. I wanted to do molecular genetics because my father told me, you should do molecular biology, it's going to be a big field. So I was thinking about employment. That was the choice that was driving me. And I went to Philadelphia because I had an opportunity to get into Penn, which didn't come through. So I spent another year working to get into Temple, which I did, and then I spent 2 years in a lab doing stuff I couldn't stand, and eventually I just told the guy running the lab, I don't like you, I don't think it works, valid for anything, I'm out of here. I had nowhere else to go, so I just hung around in the grad student rooms for about 3 months. Can you imagine how popular I was? And I found somebody who was just coming in from Penn who took me on, and he lived with his mother at the time, so he didn't, we didn't have a very great, not the best of relationships. Maybe I was a bit outspoken, I don't know, but take home was that I got a superb training. Actually, the training system at that university for grad school was absolutely awesome, and it opened my mind. I could think in new ways where I hadn't think that way before. I was so excited because I realized I'm getting this. It's starting to work, and I started to have original ideas. These were not very favorable in the lab I worked in, but I worked on them anyway. And I realized that I really loved the concepts of molecular evolution because it allowed me to work with sequence data, but also to look at evolution. I was combining computers and evolution, my two loves. And that really excited me. And particularly when I found out there was a workshop I could go to for free if I could get in. And I spent 3 weeks working with one of the faculty members on figuring out how to get into that course. And she really helped me a great deal. Her name is Lori Tompkins, and she's ended up actually working at NIH. And I really wanted to thank her the other day. I wrote her a letter because she helped me move on to the next stage of my career. Because when I went to that meeting, my mind was blown. There were people arguing about how to do different kinds of molecular evolution. And that trained me, and I applied for another course, and I met Linus Pauling. And he said to me, I've met him a few times before he died, and he was always really cool because he loved education. He's the ultimate educator. He forced the students to sit, he wouldn't let the faculty near him. And one faculty member climbed under the table to sit next to him, and he said, no, you don't have to get on your knees, and he moved, and he sat with the students. Really lovely guy. He told us this one concept. You need to publish. You need to think, eat, and breathe publication. And it really resonated with a lot of us. Unfortunately, it's tough to do. But. So, to summarize the rest of the story, I chose places that could teach me. I really wanted to do this museum thing, so I wrote a proposal, failed, wrote again, got into the Smithsonian Institution and worked there on molecular taxonomy of starfish. Okay? I got it out of my system. It was great. It was the best year of my life. Then I went back and did what I thought I should do, which is something to do with molecular biology. And I went to Houston. And in Houston, I worked with some great people at the Genome Center there with Richard Gibbs, and also with Winston Hide, who is a population and evolutionary biologist of note, who's very hardcore, but at the same time has a wicked sense of humor, and we got along just fine. And I met Dan Grau, who you may have heard of because of his outspokenness, and he wasn't less outspoken then, may I assure you. And we were sitting one day, and he was smoking and drinking coffee, which he can do at the same time. And he just does that. He just feeds himself, and he paces. And he's a magical guy to sit next to because he's never still. And he was saying, type this, help me with this. I want this, give me that. He was like that. And I was saying, but that's a stupid idea. We had such fun working together. And we were trying to get the guinea pigs to sit in the right evolutionary branch, and this wouldn't because our data was data acquisition bias. It's a huge, big data acquisition bias problem, and we refused to understand that. We didn't think about it because we were just going to do a kind of treeing which would give us the result. But we might be able to support statistics. And after working on that for 3 weeks, we wrote a paper and submitted it. And for a year and a half, we fought with everybody about that paper, but we got it in. And just to sense it out, the Winston Hide, who I was working with, stood on the desk each time a review would come in and would tear up the reviews and scatter them around the room. I mean, that didn't really give me the mentorship that I needed. But Jesus, I enjoyed myself. I mean, it was really fun, right? And the point is, so I was sort of dragged into that thing. But what was great is that my work was being said by leaders in the field as the most ridiculous thing that anyone had ever heard of. And I was happy. because I was getting cited like crazy, okay? 319 citations for writing something, and a lot of those were papers that were reported, 30 papers written to refute my findings. I loved this, okay? So this is exactly the kind of science that I thought I should do, right? But, you have to admit when you're wrong, and we were very wrong. It was a total data acquisition bias problem. It taught me a lot about, data acquisition bias, but it also taught me a lot about how to stick to your guns if you think you're right, if the data supports it. So I became a data-driven scientist early on, even now perhaps learning a bit more to assess whether the data is appropriate. Very soon after that, very serious personal knocks. Within a period of a month, my mother dropped dead, my wife left me, my ex-wife was raped. I had to leave work. And I floated, much like this guy, right? And I had to get back in the spaceship. And I realized after a year after that, that I'd do that to myself every year. I'd think, where am I? And am I doing what is appropriate? And effectively, I was working on molecular evolution and designing algorithms, really enjoying it. I was so excited. And moving forward with that, I'll finish shortly. Moving forward with that, I thought, the Silicon Valley thing, I've got to try it out. So I went out there and I worked with Floyd Kwame and these guys in Sand Hill Road, and they put me into this environment of working with high-performance architecture. They gave me an airline ticket that was open. I could go anywhere I wanted in the whole world. It's where I met most of the people, all of my fogies and not fogies in the room. And I'll tell you, I had a great time. But I learned there the power of networking, okay? And then I was able to use all those contacts to go back to South Africa at the fall of apartheid and do something I felt was important. And get going, and get everybody excited, and also be structured and organized as best you can if you've had no postdoctoral training, And I went ahead and did the best I could. And, muddled on through, and some very wonderful people, including Nikki, helped me learn how to do things properly. And we were successful, I think, okay? And we developed a whole bunch of training programs, did a whole bunch of capacity development, had a great time. And it went well. And then, two things I want to say, though. I followed area, it was very important, HIV, and contributed to that. And also I took opportunities. And there was an opportunity to come and help, strategically help at Harvard to figure out how to change the way they're doing comp bio at the department that ended up hiring Curtis. And I came there and did a bit of work to do a strategy, and then they gave a directed hire. Along the way, I discovered something. You need to find a good mentor and stick with them. And that means somebody just so much smarter than you, so much better than you, but you use them, and they help you. And you find that person, and you don't let them go. And that really worked for me. And I chose a few people, including one of them was Sydney Brenner. And these people have really helped me understand what not to do. And so the strategy that I use is effectively to get ahead of what's happening, think about it, develop some tools which are appropriate, and be ready for them when the paradigms shift, which means that it's hard to get funding, but it's very exciting when things hit. It's risky, but it's starting to work quite well. I chose Sheffield because it brings together the right kind of people. It's a very people-oriented environment, and food, as you can notice. And it allows you to bring together the pieces that are right if you're a human-oriented person. And I love working there now because I chose to go there. I wanted to go there because I could access all the translational aspects with people who are very human-oriented, who attend the deaths of their patients, and at the same time attend the graduation of their PhD students. I mean, that's a wonderful environment. So I wanted to stress, for me, it's been go where you can learn and go where you're valued. And I want to finish off, obviously we do this work here, is I work with people I respect, and I surround myself with them, and I like that strategy. I'm looking for people to come and work with me, obviously. Cornerstone, key issue, is go to places that value you. And if you're valued, be loyal, and you'll be fine. Thank you.
So there will be an opportunity to ask questions, but I think we're going to go through the talks first, and then all three speakers will come up and address questions. And, okay, the next speaker is Nikki.
If I can get this one. No. My screen's gone all big. So. Hang on. This one.
songs.
Sorry.
Does anybody have a question for Wayne while we're waiting?
Got it.
What?
We're ready.
Oh, we're ready?
Pumps up.
Okay, here we go. All right.
Okay, so I'm sticking a bit to the format that was that Michelle sent around. So my current position is I'm a professor in bioinformatics at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. I had the computational biology division there. But for my sins, the greatest amount of work I do is a PI of a Pan-African bioinformatics network of 34 institutions in 16 countries. So that keeps me pretty busy. So I'm going to go through the career path that I took and then go through which parts of those were choice and which parts of those were complete serendipity. So all I can say is only the middle bits were planned. So I actually, throughout my entire life, was going to be an artist. I love art. It has bugger all to do with science. And I was going to do graphic art. It was only in my, literally the last 2 months of my high school, you have to go see your career guidance person. And the woman said, well, look with your marks, you can get into any degree you want at university. So I said, oh, well, tell me what's out there. So she went through the BSc degree. I thought, oh, that looks really cool. Let me do that. So I applied and I got in and I loved it. And then also, like when I was interested in evolution, so I actually signed up for anatomical science, which is more about archaeology. And then really got into microbial science. So I was one of about 6 people in the whole of our school year that didn't do biology and ended up majoring and doing a PhD in microbiology. So that was a bit of a surprise. So I did microbiology and chemistry, and then I did a microbiology honors. And then I went on to do a PhD in medical micro. And again, this was a bit of pot-like. I went for an interview at one of the universities and got into it was a big TB program that Glaxo was sponsoring at the time. So actually, I don't like Stellenbosch University. I'd like to go back to UCT. So I just walked in to the PI and I said, oh, you're on this grant too. Do you have any PhD studentships available? So we had an ad hoc interview and started a month later. So out of all of that, all the red bits was complete serendipity. Some of it was planned, and then the orange part was sort of half planned, half potluck. And then during my PhD, I ended up, this is showing my age now, but in those days, the TB genome hadn't been sequenced. I mean, there were hardly any genome sequences out there. So that was only sequenced halfway through my PhD. So I had to do a lot of bioinformatics, and again, showing my age, we did blast searches on, you had to stick in all the little hard drives, the little floppies to get your data on it. The switchplot was on a multiple different disks. Some people are nodding, so they've been there before. And the rest was self-taught because we had no bioinformatics then at that time. And then Win came and gave a talk actually, and he said, oh, I'm starting bioinformatics. So I got into bioinformatics, and then I really wanted to do that. I traveled for a year and then came back and went to Win and said, so, how about it? I want to maybe think about a postdoc. But I actually had a work permit for the UK, so I thought, let me go there. So I applied to the EBI, thinking, oh, well, it's not going to happen because it's a European thing. And being South African didn't matter, so I got in. And again, the first part was a bit of serendipity, getting into the bioinformatics field simply because of need. So a lot of these things were driven by need. I needed something, I needed a technique, so I learned it and I taught myself. And then the rest was planned. So I went to EBI. I actually worked as a switchblock curator for probably about 2 months, and there were 2 of us that started at the same time, and we were probably so bad that then they needed a new project. Interpro was just starting up. It was in the development stages. And maybe we were so bad at annotation of Switchbot that they decided to hand us over to the Interpro team. And we got really involved in Interpro, and then eventually evolved to lead the project. So I was team leader of Interpro for, in the end, I was at EBI for 8.5 years. So again, there was just pure luck. The project happened to come along. Rolf needed some people to work on it, got involved in that, and ended up actually running the project in the end. So some of that is a bit of, I guess, some of the skills, that your natural skills that come out. So there were 2 of us. Maybe I had better leadership skills, and so sort of naturally just progressed to that position. Maybe it was, again, potluck. So then also another thing that I started was Interpro, I wanted to classify genomes. I was interested in research on microbial genomes. So I'd started my own functional classification scheme. This was before Go came about. And then Rolf had mentioned that to various people who were doing the human genome paper, the Nature paper. And they didn't have a way at the time to functionally classify the protein sequences because Go wasn't out there. And so I did the classification for that using the scheme, which then eventually evolved to Go. And then I did the Interpro to Go mappings, which are still ongoing. So that was really interesting because then I got, obviously on the Nature paper, which has received, I don't know, 26,000 citations, that Nature paper by now. I mean, you're one of the list of about 20,000 authors too, but still, it counts. And then, so in general, being at EBI, I try to make the most of the time there. So if there was a seminar by anyone or everyone, I went to that seminar and really got exposed to a wide variety of fields. I was in the big sequence database group, and so you get exposed to how services are developed and run, as well as sort of research at the time. So again, some planned, some serendipity, some a bit of both. And then I'd also actually, while I was there, at HGMP at the time, which is still open, and they were running courses, so I just taught myself a wide variety of different bioinformatics techniques. So meanwhile, back at home, I really wanted to come home. Cambridge is not quite as exciting as Cape Town in terms of lifestyle. And things were hotting up there with funding for bioinformatics. And so I actually went and worked with Win for a year. And then I decided when I was far too close to Win, I had to move 15 kilometers away to the other university. And then when he moved to Harvard, we got on even better because he was then thousands of. But I have to say that this connection with Win was, again, it's a friendship that we've had for a long time. But he actually got me involved in ABINET, which is basically a project. It was a big meeting, WHO meeting we had in Nigeria, which eventually led to now a $13 million NIH project for this Pan-African Bioinformatics Network. So again, it was a chance meeting. I actually had another meeting I was supposed to go to in the UK, and I thought, actually, no, this meeting in Nigeria is more important. I had to cancel at the last minute the UK one and went to the Nigerian one, and it's led to this. And now, that's most of my time spent is on this project. And so again, in this case, a little bit more was planned. And then basically I've moved on to head the group at UCT now. But I think it's also been to take your opportunities where you see them, and don't be shy to do that. And don't be shy to build networks. I think that's the most important. So then we're also asked to talk about how do you learn other non-science stuff. So how to teach, how to manage a group. Teaching, basically just take on board the evaluations you get from the students. The first time you're going to do it, you're going to get crap evaluations probably. But then you take this on board, you improve. And like Win says, get a good mentor. I did whatever courses I could. I tried to expand my skills in whatever area I could. But I think the bottom line is some academics are good managers, some are good thinkers. And they don't necessarily go together. And you need to think, what is your strength? Are you a manager? Are you a leader? Or are you just one of these blue skies? You can think of fantastic ideas and then hire a project manager, hire a good person to be with you. So surround yourself with good people, build on the strengths that you have and exploit them. And then you can work on the weaker areas through training. So some training courses, some basic courses will do some things for you. But really, it's a lot of my stuff was learning on the job, trial and error. Some things work, some things don't. But take every opportunity you can. So think about, like in this case with Nigeria, what is an opportunity that's likely to get you somewhere that's different or where you want to be? So if somebody had asked me in high school where I would be now, I'd be designing graphics somewhere. So I would never have thought I'd be on this. But the greatest thing about this is it's the best job. Being an academic scientist is actually probably one of the best jobs in the world. You get to do what you love every day. You get to travel, you get to meet people, you get the flexibility to do what you want. So yeah, I would highly recommend it. And I guess the take home here would be get a good mentor, look at just what strengths you have and exploit them. And actually what I mentioned only briefly is networks. So my time at EBI was the best thing I could have done. If I'd stayed in South Africa, gone to ISMB, maybe it would have been good for ISMB and my career there, but I would never have had the networks that I've built internationally And I've made an effort, so for 4 years of my EBI time, I commuted between Cape Town and EBI. I had the longest commute at EBI, but it was worth it because I maintained those ties. I continued to work in international projects, and that, I think, was key to a reasonable career.
We'll have time to ask questions if we see them in time. And now our last speaker is Pat Fulton from EDI, and our third question for you.
Okay, I don't know how I'm going to follow the two people who've just gone before me, but thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I've had a rather unconventional career path, and I throw my hands up and confess I'm not a bioinformatician, but I work with bioinformaticians. I love working with people like Win, like Nikki, and so I have forged a career of sorts in bioinformatics, but it's not the typical bioinformatics career. So I'm the head of training at the EBI. And this really is a massive juggling act. I'm basically responsible for the external training program at the EBI. We started it off in about 2006, 2007, from gathering together some disparate things that individual teams were doing. Very little of what we've done is original, actually. It was all down to the thinking of other people, but we've put it together into something coherent and something that I think serves a very useful purpose for the community. And so basically, you know, there is no typical day for me. I have to juggle managing my team, which is now about 15 people, managing the program itself. We have a whole load of different projects. So trying to fit in the core job function at the EBI with all of these different projects, which are really exciting, and I really love doing them, but sometimes they have a tendency to pull you in different directions, and you have to try and stay focused on something. I'm doing a few bits and pieces that are really fun and completely voluntary, and trying to sort of fit in the stuff that is driven by your paymasters and the stuff that is totally voluntary, and getting the balance right between those two things is always a challenge for me, because you just want to do the stuff where you're being a do-gooder and you're doing all of this stuff voluntarily, but there are only 24 hours in the day, and how do you balance those two things? And then, of course, you've got the money to deal with, you've got the travel to deal with, and you've got the thing that's in shortest supply of all, which is time. So it's a case of just trying to juggle all of those things. I came to this point via a rather unusual route. I studied preclinical medicine. I thought I was going to be a pathologist when I started out. So and really, you know, my education was frightfully conventional. I went to a girls' high school and did physics, chemistry, biology A-level, and was kind of driven into doing medicine because that's what you did if you did those A-levels. So I went into medicine, and then kind of realized that actually I loved science. So I ditched the medicine and did a PhD in biochemistry instead, working on phosphoinositide kinases. I was the only girl in the lab. That was quite interesting. After that, I kind of accidentally fell into various editorial roles. I started out as a locum sub-editor on a journal called Trends in Cell Biology, and kind of gradually over 10 years worked my way through to be launch editor of Nature Reviews Cancer in 2001. I'd been in publishing for 10 years by that point, and you start to feel like a hamster on a wheel. You're constantly thinking about 3 different issues of the journal, and you're churning stuff out, basically. And I loved the science, but I wanted to do something different with it. And I saw a job ad at the EBI, and it was an advert for a Go curator. And I thought, this is different. It's not an upwards move, it's definitely a sideways move, but I think I can do that, and I think it's going to be really exciting, so I'll apply for it. And I had the craziest interview I have ever had in my entire life. The only question I was asked was before the actual interview itself, because I arrived there early. Michael Ashburner, who was interviewing me, had also arrived early. He was sitting and having a coffee outside the diner at the on the Genome campus. And he just sat me down, bought me a coffee, and stuck his elbows on the table and said, "So why the fuck do you want to leave nature?" And that was the only question he asked me. And weirdly, although I interviewed for this Go Curator's job, I didn't end up doing the Go Curator's job at all. Michael and Graham saw something in my CV. They'd been thinking about hiring an outreach person for the EBI, and they looked at my CV and thought, actually, she could do that. Let's open a post for an outreach person. So for the first 6 months at the EBI, I was juggling 2 jobs. I was trying to be a Go Curator and trying to be the outreach officer at the EBI. I put 1 term into the gene ontology. And so at that point, they realized I was not going to be a Go Curator. and they let me do outreach full time. And they hired a very, very smart Go Curator who did a hell of a lot more work on Go than I did. So I've done a few other bits and pieces while I've been there. I sort of, again, morphed into the training position simply because Graham took me on one side and said, "We need someone to do training. I want you to do it." And I said, "I've got too much on with outreach. I'm not sure I want to do this." And he said, "Well, if you don't do it, I'm going to hire someone in between you and me, and you're not going to like that, are you? So you better do it." So I did, and I'm really, really glad I made that decision because running the training program at the EBI has been a tremendous challenge. It's been enormous fun, and I get a huge amount out of it. And now I've ditched the outreach stuff, and training is my lifeblood. Yeah, and along with the training responsibility have come a whole load of other fun things. I've done some stuff with Elixir, which is this new distributed research infrastructure for biological data in Europe. I represent Elixir on a crazy project called M-Train, which is looking at education and training across all of the biomedical sciences, and bioinformatics is only a tiny part of it. But so I end up doing things like competency profiles in safety sciences and working in clinical development and all sorts of stuff that's got nothing to do with bioinformatics. Well, nothing obvious to do with bioinformatics, but then somehow ends up having something to do with bioinformatics at the end of the day. I've been having a lot of fun working with the clinical bioinformatics community now that the 100,000 Genomes Project has started in the UK. They need to educate everyone in the UK National Health Service, and they've been calling on people at the EBI to help them build competency profiles and curricula for clinical bioinformatics. That's really scary because I've never worked in clinical practice despite starting out as a medic, and I've been working with Win on that as well, actually. But it's also, again, been tremendous fun. So I see myself as a life scientist. I see myself very much as a generalist with a bird's eye view of the molecular life sciences, and that's something that's driven me throughout my career. And I have become really passionate about enabling others to make the most of publicly accessible data. But as I said at the beginning, I am most definitely not a bioinformatician. So Michelle asked us to differentiate between what was planned and what was completely serendipitous. The things that were planned were the fact that I've been fascinated by the living world all my life, much like Win. I was fascinated by plants from the age of about 3, gardened all my life. I was an obsessive bird watcher as a little girl, and I fell in love with molecules at the age of 11. As I mentioned earlier, I was really driven into a career in medicine because that's what bright girls in an all-girls school did. But I never really wanted to be a conventional doctor. And once I was at university, that fact became really, really clear to me, and I realized there were other opportunities and went off and did research instead. And at that point, everything turns into pure serendipity and opportunism. I'm afraid to say I have not been a good example to what I advocate. I planned none of this. So, I only ended up in publishing because my postdoc position fell through, and a friend in the lab thought that I'd make a good sub-editor. He thought I'd done a good job of writing my thesis. It was clear to him, although it wasn't clear to me, that I was a better science communicator than I was a scientist, and he turned out to be absolutely right. I would like to echo what Win has said about finding a good mentor. because Phil pointed me in the right direction at that point in my career. We're still very good friends, and I still go to him when I need wisdom. And I need a lot of wisdom because I've not got much myself. When I finally got tired of publishing, again, it was my friends, it was my social connections that led me to take an interest in the EBI and go down this rather, weird turn for someone who'd been in publishing for 10 years. And again, the mentorship, if you can call it that, of Graham and Michael, very, very different mentoring styles, I have to say. And their vision was what set me on the right path. And so really what's happened since then is more down to their talents than it is to mine. Common threads. Yep. Having a broad but shallow overview of science is an embarrassing thing to confess, but it's true. Ability to stick to deadlines is something that's driven me throughout my career. The fact that, like Nikki, I look outside of science for my inspiration. That the design for the Nature Reviews journals came from a gardening magazine. I've learnt to respond to criticism, and I'd like to thank Fran, because she gave our training program a real slating when we came to to the Whitehead to train, and every word that she said was accurate, and it was hard to take, but it's actually transformed our approach to training, so thank you, Fran. And then the final thing is understanding that I need people in my team who are very, very different from me, and so I basically rely on being surrounded by people who are far smarter than me and have a far more structured approach to their work than me, and also who have much better people skills than me, because I have shit people skills. So I mean, the way to do it is to work with smart people, and then it doesn't matter how bizarre and unconventional and dopey you are. I want to end with a few professional development resources. If, like me, you really have no clue where your talents lie, and if, like me, you need a little bit of help with that along the way, there are some really, really great resources out there for you. So I would strongly advocate going and looking at some of the information that's on the LifeTrain website. The Science Careers site is absolutely fantastic. They've put together a really lovely individual development planner that asks you to focus on where your real strengths lie and build on those. For the bioinformatics specific careers, take a look at the stuff that we've been doing in the ISCB education and training curriculum. The ISCB Education and Training Committee. It has a curriculum task force that's been working on CPD for different strands of bioinformatics. And if you'd like to have some input into that, do come along to the Birds of a Feather session that we're running tomorrow lunchtime. It would be great to have your input on it. And with that, thank you very much for your time, and I will shut up.
I'd like the three speakers to come up. The three speakers should come up and sit in those three chairs. You can get closer together. And I can say that the reason I felt comfortable to say something to Kath is that I met her when I went to Australia in 2003 for ISMB, and it was not at the meeting. We were on the river going to the koala park. I remember reading it. It's like, oh, you look like you're from, anyway.
I took 300 photos of koalas that day.
Okay. So, okay, so I'd like to first open this up to, I guess, to the audience, although I guess I took a couple of notes saying, one thing that people didn't explicitly talk about is having confidence in what they do. And I think that's a really important point that all of these people have had during their career, and possibly it comes from mentoring, it comes from being successful in various opportunities. And I think somebody said, you have to be creative, and that's something that I've learned through my career, is that things come at you, and you have to figure out what to do next, and it's not always what you think. And I think these people explain that, and trust your gut. I like that the best. I mean, you really, don't do, my grandmother always said, oh, you were a teacher, and I didn't want to be she wanted me to be a grade school teacher, and it's like, oh no, I can't do that. I didn't want to do that, but here I am in education now. So, but exploit your strengths. That was another point I think somebody made. But I'd like to open it up to other people and any questions specifically for any of the career paths?
Yeah, so to what extent did, your personal life influence your career path? That's my question, actually.
Enormously, in my case. I don't think I would have gone into biochemistry if I hadn't had a boyfriend who was a biochemist. I don't think I would have got obsessed with drug discovery and development if he hadn't gone into drug discovery and development. So my personal life has had a huge sway on my career.
Yeah.
I think it's an important factor. It's one that you have to take a personal approach to and decide how you will take it and what you do. And during your career, it has different weights. My first wife said, "I'll go anywhere with you while you postdoc," but she didn't do it, and then she left me. The second, my delightful wife now, we make all the choices together. It's much different. So I do think it's very important, though, for you to think what is going to make you happy personally, and that includes the environment. It's not just the work choice, the research choice.
Yeah, so for me as well, this is not relationships I had that influenced anything. My boyfriend at the time, we completely unsynchronized everything. He went overseas when I was still doing my PhD, and I was finished, and he wanted to come back, so we swapped over, and it just didn't work out. So that wasn't an influence at all. But I wanted to go home, so I wanted to go back. I always knew I wanted to go back to South Africa, and I knew it was a place that I could make a difference. I had great opportunities at EBI. Rolf was already talking about a possibility of one of his rolling contracts, and it was really, and the desire to go home was stronger. And the lifestyle desire, and the lifestyle for me was more important, because I didn't want to spend so much time at work and then go home and not be happy. And so for me it was, and also being near my family and everything was important. So I had to then make that work, and I did.
Other comments, questions?
So I noticed with all three of you at some stage you made a bold choice to break out of the kind of path you were in. What motivated that choice or decision?
While you were thinking about it, I wanted to do something I knew I could do, and there was nothing in the way. So there was nothing in the way, and I pretty much knew I could do it. I was ambitious. I thought maybe I can do that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I can do it. So I went for it. It felt right, even if I had no idea how I was going to do it.
Yeah, I guess also, so for me it was knowing that it wasn't a one-way road. If you didn't like it, you can change. It's the same with any career. So actually, if I had to give up science tomorrow and become I always thought I should be an architect because I like maths and I like art. If I had to give up science tomorrow, I thought, well, I've done that, I enjoyed it, happy to move on. So it's not like you're going to take a step and you never have the choice to come back. So I think that it gives you the safety net that you can try something else and it's okay. If it doesn't work out, you try something else again after that.
I think with me it was a sense of not being able to go any further and enjoy it where I was. If you want to continue a career in publishing after you've been an editor for 10 years, you tend to become a publisher. You go down the business development route. I wasn't really interested in developing a business for Nature Publishing Group. I was interested in the science, and so I started looking for something that would enable me to continue doing science, but to do that broad overview stuff, not to focus in on one area of research, because by that point I'd realised that wasn't me.
Can you speak up a little louder?
Just a question that, how do you feel to be the only lady in the lab?
That was actually quite a challenge. It was quite a nice environment, and I was never subjected to any form of discrimination, but I had to muck in with the lads. I had to learn to muck in with the lads, and it was, and they, a lot of them had very different lifestyles from me. They were capable of being in the lab at 7 in the morning, having been to the gym for an hour, and working through till 2 o'clock in the morning, and then getting up and doing it all over again. And I wasn't capable of doing that. So you know, working in that kind of an environment and not having any female role models was quite tough actually. Of course, at the EDI I had a fantastic female role model because Janet Thornton was my boss for a long time, and she's just the most wonderful female role model you could ever imagine having. And I think the vast majority of my team now are female. So I've done my bit for women's lib.
Other questions? Yeah.
How do you know a good mentor? Somebody who's going to give you advice that's going to help you. Just
Look at where they are. So if they are in a place that you want to be, then they must have done something right.
You know, you go into, you approach them, or they approach you, they start giving you advice. But they give it to you, they don't talk down to you. And it's awesome. They give you very frank, they've got a view you just don't have, and they give you a very frank assessment of what's happening, or where to go, or how to do it. That's amazing. I've never been formally mentored until I went to Harvard, and I didn't know you get mentored there. And the academic dean was my mentor, wonderful man, and he just gave me very gentle but incredibly wise advice. And I felt so safe because I could just share everything. And you don't get anyone like that in your workday environment. You need to find people who really get it. That phrase is really important.
I think for me, it's about finding someone who shares the same values as me. Because then you can trust them to mentor you, because you know that the advice you're giving, the advice that they're giving you is going to be true to your values.
Just to add on to that, one thing that the White Coast Association was trying to push into effect was having a second mentor, somebody outside of your department, somebody who has a different perspective, somebody from another institution. And that can be very helpful too. If you're a woman and you have a male supervisor, maybe you want a female supervisor from another department or another institution. And you know, there are other ways in which you can do that, but that's something to think about as well. Other questions?
Any regrets?
Nobody wants to share.
you can see the wheels turning. But
I have one regret, which is that I've never worked outside of the UK, and I think it would have been fun to do something a little bit more adventurous. And that's where that getting that balance between work and life starts to force you to make a few compromises.
Well, I want to counter that. I wish that I'd been in the same place at the same time. So I could see if I could have, how my career would have been then. You know, would I have been something else, or would I have been as successful or not? I have no idea. Never having a stable opportunity as to what comes next. It's worth to look back and see. Wish it had happened another way.
Nothing major, actually. I mean, there could be little things that you regret along the way, but nothing major that would have such a huge impact.
Yes.
So I guess it's more directed for you, Dr. Hyde, and everyone else in this. So at what point did you start listening to just your gut and stop asking for advice and questions? Because I know a lot of young researchers are, you know, we all ask a lot of questions when we go into something we have no idea about. But there is a gut feeling. You have to realize that. Sometimes the questions fog our gut, or we're not sure if it's exactly what we need.
Actually, it's a really good question, and I think I'm going to be careful to try and answer this in structured ways as best I can. Once again, it's basic. Sometimes, you know, depending on the value, the importance of the question. But if you know I knew I wanted to go home to South Africa, so I wanted to find a means to do that. So I found somebody who was there, and I made a proposal to start an institute, and it happened. But I knew I wanted to do that, and my gut was telling me that nothing else was. So that was not an emotional decision; it was just a draw. I knew I wanted to do research. Those are the big, so you have the ethos, but then the implementation becomes an issue of interacting with people. But I'll tell you, moving to England was something that wasn't necessarily a gut reaction. That was a very reasoned process. and actually deciding what research I wanted to do in the last 8 years, I started out thinking I really should follow along with what everybody does here and follow the formal career track and do what people think I should do. And after 2.5 years, I was absolutely miserable. And I kept going for another year. So nearly 3.5 years into it, I tried to do what I thought was the right thing. And I wasn't being that successful at what people expected me to do. And then one day I said, screw this, I'm going to do things the way I can do it. And the minute I did that, I was much happier. And within a year, I raised great money and a good team, and I was flying. And I didn't stop flying, it was changing plane's direction. And I've kept at that. And it's quite a late career choice, but I used to do exactly what I thought I should do. I was happy. And taking too much advice, we had some really good advice today from Carol, right? How to write a grant. And that's the formal didactics, if you like, of writing a grant. That you also have to trust your own style. I want to finish off by mentioning a colleague of mine, Les Kopsik. And there's a very, very structured style. Like Larry, I'm sure you're aware of this, and mutual friend, in writing a grant from the States to NIH. You've got to stay within, you supposedly have to stay within the very strict boundaries in order to have the review panel take you seriously. The colleague of mine, Les Kopsik, doesn't do that. He starts to look, there are 3 reasons you should fund this grant. It addresses the reviewer. You have a responsibility when you read this to think the following ways. And then he draws you in a narrative. It's like reading a work of literature. It's very hard science in there, but it's just different. It's not in a classic scientific style. And once you appreciate the depth and you get over the shock, it's wonderful. And he's a very successful scientist. And so, this goes back to that issue. You have to follow your gut, but you do have to understand where people are going to revolt in terms of following the norms. And I think that boils down to letting your own specific strengths shine through, and as somebody else said, acknowledge your weaknesses and put them out there right in front. So these are the things where we know we're weak. This is what we'll do. Where I'm weak, I'll do it. Focus on your strengths. People will bring you on board based upon your strengths. It's very good.
Other questions?
Question about dealing with stress. You look like very stressless people, like you're sitting there. But I think that science is actually a very stressful environment, at least it can be, and it's very much self-imposed, right? There's almost no boss that said, okay, you have to do this, buy this, it's self-imposed. So how do you deal with that?
Nikki, you're good at that.
So, yeah, one thing I actually, when I hadn't mentioned was that actually my job starts when I go to work, so I get to work at sort of 8:30, 9 o'clock. I get home, I get my kids fed and in bed and everything, and then I pick up my laptop again and I go till 12 at least. That's every single day. And sometimes I actually I walk into a store and I look at people and I think, when you go home, you don't have to think about anything. You don't have to think about all the students that you're working with, So it is hard, but it comes and goes. So you have stressful periods, and then you have a slightly, although I can't remember when the last stressful period. I guess it's just like, you need to put it into perspective. So at some point you can say, I've got so much to do, what is mission critical? And actually just put, what is going to affect too many other people? And what could I actually just put aside for between midnight and 1 in the morning? So it is stressful, but I think as long as you keep putting things back into perspective and saying, okay, I really wish I could have done all of these things, but what is the most important I can deal with now?
I also think it could be more, you can be more comfortable with all this in something that Wynn said, which was feeling valued. If you feel like what you're doing is good stuff, and it helps calm you down, that you're really, you're making progress and you're really helping the community. And I think that can help reduce it. And then you have to go play tennis or something and to really figure out.
But it's a rat race, right? And it's so easy to spin out of control, right? So
yeah, I think you have to, let's qualify that. Okay?
Yeah, and you have to learn to be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
You have to learn that if you fall over, you're not going to do anybody any good. You're not going to do your team any good. You're not going to do your institute any good. So it's a hard lesson to learn, and I think, you know, probably just about everybody in the room has come close to tipping over the top at some point. But you just have to learn that sometimes you need a break.
You need to learn to say no.
Yeah, you learn to say no, and I mean, I want to be very honest with everybody here, right? So this job I had in South Africa was not easy, because I had to personally hold up a lot of things because there was nothing else to hold them up. And the stress upon me physically and personally was enormous. And it really got hard. And it started hard and it didn't get any easier. And it took an enormous toll on my life and my wife and my family. And I was going to an acupuncturist and trying this and that. And then, you know, when I took a break, as I say, I went to Harvard, which was a cakewalk in comparison to the stress I used to feel, because I didn't have to personally carry so many other people's, you know, careers and lives. I'd actually got off a plane once because we had to raise money for a building, and I had to be there. I had to get there from DC in a certain amount of time, and literally I had to get from the airport to this meeting at my university. And after that meeting, I had to go to hospital. So it was very hard. The other side of that was understanding that that was a problem. And people started to talk to me about that, and I was actually diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, although I never fired a gun, but I saw plenty of guns. And the issue was that I was scared of going outside, and all kinds of things happened to me when I started working hard. Very personal, I want to share it with you. Just so you know that you can grossly mismanage your stress. And you can you can do yourself great service. And then I learned something. You're going to be just as successful if you set aside the time and become a smart Nikki. Right? And she always says to me when I'm not available, I say, why? I'm going to be recycling on Monday. Okay. And now that's me. And thank you, Nikki, for that. But it's me, because now I walk 8 minutes to home. Our home is 10 minutes from work. I don't commute anymore. I've got a great bike. I take it easy. I put my work away at 5. And that's because I've become super efficient at work. And there isn't a moment I waste when I'm working. And unfortunately, that means a lot of things don't get done as fast. But now I'm very happy at work, and I've got a lot into my kids and relaxing now. Because I just think you have to sort out who you are early, because that's you don't know who you're going to become.
And have a good team.
Awesome teams. Hire really carefully. Give them what they need to be successful. Don't get in their way. Set them good goals, and you'll be great. Be happy.
And at this point, I think although we could probably go on for another hour or two, I think we should thank our speakers and go down to the exhibit hall and go to the Goblet website, the Goblet exhibit. This is for global organization for bioinformatics learning, education, and training. And all of you should be members. Yay!